Have you ever jumped off a building? Have you been on the US Archery Team or competed in more than 120 professional archery events worldwide? Have you ever been shot at? For that matter, have you ever been shot? Today on Gritty, I'm joined by two remarkable human beings. There are few people who can lay claim to the accomplishments that these men have achieved in their respective areas of expertise. My guests today are John Dudley, professional archer and passionate bow hunter, and Andy Stumpf, retired Navy SEAL and the man who jumps off buildings. John Dudley started shooting professionally in 1997 and has competed all over the world. John has 45 career top 3 professional finishes. Here are just a few of John's professional accomplishments: APA Rookie of the Year, IBO National Champion twice, NABH National Champion, European Grand Prix Gold Medalist, World Field Championship Bronze. In short, John knows how to shoot a bow. And more than that, John has a knack for teaching his craft to others. Andy Stumpf executed hundreds of combat operations throughout the world over his 17-year career in the military. He was medically retired in June of 2013. His awards and decorations include 5 Bronze Star medals, 4 with Valor, the Purple Heart, the Joint Service Commendation Medal, the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Valor, 3 Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medals, 2 Combat Action Ribbons, and the Presidential Unit Citation. In 2015, he set 2 world records after jumping from 36,500 feet and flying over 18 miles in a wingsuit in an effort to raise $1 million for the Navy SEAL Foundation. Okay, there you have it, folks. These two guys are unique. Each have excelled in their chosen endeavors. They're both able to govern their fear, manage their heart rate, and perform under extreme pressure. And we talk about this and much more on today's podcast. It's good stuff. If you like what you hear, do me a favor and support each of these guys by following them on social media and subscribing to their respective podcasts, Knock On Podcast and Cleared Hot. Enjoy the show.
Because people ask me, like, oh, man, what do you just not feel fear? And it's like, no, when I'm standing on the edge getting ready to base jump, my resting heart rate's like 170. My mouth is dry. There's probably a little bit of pee that came out. And, like, it's every alarm bell in your body is like, don't do this.
Right.
I feel like confidence. You know, I feel like if there's ever that little voice, it's like, can I make this shot? Like, I've been with people that are like, you think I can make that shot? And I'm like, no. Like,
absolutely 100% no.
All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Bowman Podcast. We're at the ATA show in Indianapolis,
Yep.
Indiana.
That's it.
And I'm joined by John Dudley with Knock On and Andy Stumpf.
Correct. Pronounce the F, people.
Andy Stumpf. And is that and that's how you say it, right?
Tree stump with an F on the end. Stumpf.
You do throw the F on.
I do.
Yeah.
He likes to get the F in there.
I do.
Stumpf. Well, that's cool. You know, I listened to you guys on the podcast together on Knock On Podcast a couple of times.
I'm sorry.
I know Andy's pretty new to archery.
Just about everything in this building.
So you come with this fresh perspective.
It's I would like to think so. I have a little bit of insight into hunting, but it was more of the biped action instead of the the 4-legged species.
Right.
Some of those things help. Some of them don't help at all.
Really?
Yeah.
I wanted to find this text from you yesterday because you saying everything's so new. That was so hilarious. So Andy texts me and Hunter, who, the 3 of us were on that trip in France for chamois, and we never shot one. But so we didn't get to see any up close.
Yeah.
So yesterday, Andy was walking around, and he just says, come to booth 5. This is Hunter says, come to booth 531 to find out what a chamois looks like. So here's my response.
That's a tar.
It's like, dude, you still don't even know what the hell we were going for.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, that was hilarious.
Yeah, I heard Andy, John helped set you up with a bow and all that kind of stuff. And
I don't know if I ever would have. So I had a bow before I had met Dud, but I was just kind of in the backyard shooting it, and I hadn't quite frankly really thought too much about hunting, and I don't think I ever would have hunted because personally, for whatever reason, I just associated it with rifle hunting. So if it wouldn't have been closing the loop and actually meeting Dud, and he, I would say, definitely shepherded me through my first experiences and is continuing to do so, I don't think I ever would have gotten into hunting.
Really?
Yeah. But from I met him, tuned my bow up for me, definitely worked on the form, which was good. It couldn't have gotten any worse, so therefore everything was a positive step in the right direction. And then called me up a couple weeks later, was like, hey, do you want to go hunt? And I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I also, I don't think I'm the dumbest either. And I realized, I was like, wait a minute, go hunting with an extremely experienced individual? Yes, we'll do that. And then that was just my first of many eye-opening experiences. But I would describe it as having my toes in the kiddie pool.
Now, you've lived a very intense life up to this point. And so I find it interesting that you're diving head first, into the whole bow hunting space.
Is there any other way?
I think it's wise to do it this way. You don't want to dabble.
I don't think you could dabble. There's too many moving pieces.
Yeah.
If you dabbled, I don't think you'd actually get anywhere. I think it's full water hose and try to absorb as much as possible and then and keep it coming.
Yeah, because, I've seen some of the stuff that you've done, like jump off buildings and stuff.
Yep.
Give some folks some background there. I think
that's a low one. That's like saying, John, I've seen you shoot at 20 yards. I'm like, where's he going with this? Oh, wait, really kind of boring.
So tell me, so people have some background on you that may not know about you.
So the vast majority of my adult life, I was in the military. Mm-hmm. While I was in the military, I got exposed to jumping because it was just part of the job. But the first exposure was the first time I ever jumped out of an airplane was at basic airborne school at Fort Benning, Georgia. And I did not utilize the technique that they had recommended for landing, so I went heels back of my head. Ooh. And laid there for about 5 minutes with just a terrible ringing nausea sensation. And as the airplanes just kept coming and thousands of people in the military were jumping out, and then my thought in my head was, I have to do this 4 more times. It was terrible. I was coming in. I literally went heels back of my head, and I don't know if I can do this again. The rest of the jumps went better. It was a great experience. And then further on down in my career, I was watching people who were doing free fall jumping. So static line jumping, you actually have a cable. I think it's a fabric, probably a tether. It's probably 20 feet long. It pulls your parachute for you. It's extremely violent. And the landing is probably the equivalent of jumping off a 20-foot building. That's a good landing. 40-footer if it's a bad landing. And it wouldn't be uncommon to hear people land and just yell, medic! And hear femurs just detonating. And so you're on one side of the aircraft. And on the other side of the aircraft are people pointing and laughing and judging you because they have a free fall parachute on. And when you're getting out at 800 feet or 1,200 feet, they're going up to 13,000 feet, and they're high-fiving and laughing and having a great time when they get on the ground as you're limping back to the bus. So I was like, well, I'm on the wrong side of the airplane here.
Yeah.
But I was so junior in my career that I would have had to wait like 4 or 5 more years. Mm-hmm. So I just went to a civilian drop zone in San Diego, and people think that skydiving is complex. I went there on Friday and took 6 hours of training where you practice some emergency procedures and was jumping on my own by Sunday.
Really?
And the point of it, it's 8 jumps, and you're certified. I'm going to use that term incredibly loosely. Much like a guy who has a driver's license doesn't mean you should probably get into a Lamborghini, on a closed course and get after it. But
Bieber did it.
He did. Bieber also has enough money to, pay for the Lamborghini that he wraps around the poles. But that was and as soon as I did a free fall jump, I got to the ground. I'm like, okay, this is kind of my jam. So that led to, I was able to pursue that type of stuff in the military, and I was able to get a bunch of military air quals and definitely develop a passion for it. Anytime I got a chance to go to a different school or learn more about it, I took it. Then when I got out of the military, continued to pursue it the way that I wanted to. I had always wanted to base jump, but it was expressly prohibited given my occupation. So I And I thought that was more of a new skill to learn that would be even more, well-rounded. I think it's good to be well-rounded and not just good at 1% of the pie.
Right.
So I met the guy who taught me how to base jump in the parking lot, and like 10 minutes later I was hanging off the side of a bridge, jumping off of it, and which led to a passion for doing that, which led to, the building aspect comes in. Difference between skydiving and base jumping for people who aren't familiar. One's out of a plane. Base jumping is basically a fixed object. It can be the earth. The acronym itself stands for building, antenna, span, and earth. You can jump off those things. I recommend everybody does. But, not everybody likes the things that I like. And so that, after I got out of the military, I started doing that at the level that I wanted to do it, and I was enabled to do it through some partnerships with organizations, and started off with just, endorsement and sponsorship deals in that world. And that's still.
How many jumps have you done now so far?
Just over 7,000.
What?
Well, and so a lot of people will say that if you work in the skydiving industry, 20,000 is probably a really good number. So I don't have as much experience as people who have worked in it for a long time. But if you work in the sport, you'll have 10, 15, 20,000 jumps. It's not uncommon.
Wow. Dang. I'm
going to do it.
You should.
I heard you on, I think it was Chris Spieler.
Yep.
Podcast.
Yeah, Chris is a good friend.
And you were talking about, managing fear.
Yes.
And, I took away a few things from that podcast, but you mentioned it being calculated. It's not like you just go jump. Like, you're very confident in preparation and then knowing exactly what you're going to do.
So that's why I hate YouTube. And, well, I hate YouTube and social media in the fact that it generally tells an incomplete story.
Yeah.
Most of especially the skydiving, the base jumping, the wingsuit stuff, the video will start a few seconds before the jump begins.
Totally.
And it'll end generally before the person lands on the ground. And it doesn't tell any of the other stuff that comes in there, the training and I jump with some of the best people in the world, and a picture or a 30-second video doesn't show how they got to where they are. It just shows what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And I've found that it changes people's perception, and they'll come to a drop zone, and I've heard this time and time again, I'm only here to get the minimum amount of jumps. I just want to learn to skydive so I can go wingsuit base jump. And you're going to die if you do that because you don't understand the full spectrum. And in that spectrum is the fear aspect that you're talking about. Because people ask me, like, oh, man, what do you just not feel fear? And it's like, no, when I'm standing on the edge getting ready to base jump, my resting heart rate's like 170. My mouth is dry. There's probably a little bit of pee that came out. And it's every alarm bell in your body is like, don't do this.
Right.
And so and if you don't feel that, you shouldn't be jumping because you're going to die. Because you're totally complacent. You're not paying attention to what's actually going on. Everybody experiences fear, I think, to the same degree. I think what differentiates people is how they manage it. Mm-hmm. I have a healthy. I love my life. I'm not trying to die. I would actually say I'm trying to live my life and set an example for my kids. I want them to see people living their life and filling up the one lap you get along the way with as much stuff as possible. I'd rather go out at 60 doing something that I love than die at 90 going, man, I wish I had done fill in the blank.
Right.
And but to get back to the calculation and everything that goes into it, like there's so much that just doesn't show up. And those mediums, I struggle with those mediums because I like the story of how you got there more than the story of what it is that you're actually doing.
Yeah. Well, John comes to archery with that level of detail.
Yep.
Like, planning and intense, like, attention.
And I would say grinding. I mean, you were just, to get your experience, you ground it out. Like when you talk about the pro archery tours that you were shooting on, like, you could post pictures every day of you at another tournament. That's not going to tell the story of what you had to do to get there.
Yeah, because that's literally 40 arrows, but there might have been 4,000 that week prepping for the 40.
Yeah.
Or one picture at a tournament is 1/40th of just the tournament. So, I mean, that's the downside to some of the hunting, too, and, is that you're posting a picture you're trying to show something cool about it, but at least from my perspective, you don't really get to show the whole experience. I mean, we made posts for things that we did in France and we've talked about it. We did some podcasts about it, but there's still 75% of that's untold. And I think with really good hunters and seasoned hunters, I think that's the tough part about learning, is trying to have something trigger a memory that lets you talk about something else that you've just kind of forgot about too.
That's why I like podcasts.
Yeah.
That long form communication.
It's a cool medium.
Yeah.
It
sort of spills out. Oh, you just start talking, and all of a sudden you don't know it, but you just drop some gold nugget of wisdom for a guy that
it's not going to show up in a picture form.
No, no. So you guys have hit it off pretty well. So what do you think that's built off of?
Gayness, I mean.
Cameron, yeah, I mean.
Oh, God, we got a three-way already? No, I think, honestly, for me, and I don't want to take anything away from Andy because Andy's a really credible guy, but for me, all of my friends and people that I have a pretty small circle of friends that I like to communicate with or, talk about daily life with.
Yeah.
Or pretty much absorb what would be my family time with. And the one thing that's consistent is it's guys that have really good work ethic and guys that have integrity. When there's guys that are transparent to me, and I can be transparent to them, and there's guys that that have work ethic and work hard at the same pace as me, then I think it's
a good fit.
It is, and I mean that's the one downside. I come to this ATA show, and there's groups that come here, and there's a group of guys that are here, and they got a new thing going, and then the next year, they each got a new thing going.
Yeah,
and a lot of times it's because one guy does one thing, and he works hard, and then the other guy doesn't necessarily tote the bill,
right?
And it doesn't work out. So I don't know if it's being antisocial in a way, but I've just really, really limited the number of people that I have within that community to me. And I don't know if that's just my personality, but it all boils down to, when Andy was actually going, he was speaking at a CrossFit Games in Madison. Mm-hmm. And Joe told me that, and Joe's like, hey, dude, do you think you could help Andy a little bit? And I said, yeah. And then so I called him. And I said, well, why don't you just drive down? It's 2.5 hours down. He's like, I'm there. So we got to spend a full day shooting and stuff like that. And Andy obviously was super detail-oriented. That's another thing, too. A lot of the people that I work with and a lot of the people that I continue to coach, they're people that are coachable. Okay. When I try to coach people or I try to tell them something, there's a term that I saw years ago called an ask hole. Have you ever seen that?
Yes.
It's a great term.
It's an awesome term. It's like I give people 2 strikes. If they're coming for a particular expertise and they're asking and I'm telling them what my experience is trying to help them with, and then it doesn't get applied at that point, it's just wasted time for me. And I don't want to be a mean about it, but with Andy, the things that I talked to him about and the things that I showed him that day, he was implementing right then. And
I'm good at following instructions.
Yeah, and that's his background. And then it just so happened that someone bailed out of this hunt that I normally do in Alberta with the outfitter, and the outfitter called me and said, is there any way you could find someone that might take a real last-minute slot? And I said, well, let me give someone a call. So I called Andy, and he's like, when is it? And I'm like, I think it's next week.
Thursday? He literally was like, I think it's Thursday. This was on a Saturday.
So he texts me back, and he's like, well, it's a little quick. He's like, definitely for next year. And then he texts me and says, Jamie says go. And I kind of thought like, okay, well, that's still next year. But then I think on Wednesday, he's like, so what are you packing? I'm like, for what? And he goes, dude, I'm in. And I'm like, oh, awesome. And then he said, I'm just going to drive up. So then I said, well, do you want to just grab me in Edmonton? So I literally walk out of the airport. And granted, Andy and I had only, at that point, met each other 3 days. Vegas.
That doesn't count because I was time traveling.
Yeah, we were both. We may not even have been ourselves that day. But then the 2 days that he was with me shooting, and then he pulls up, picks me up, and just freaking awesomest Ford with that new Shelby motor in it. Freaking all Black Ops out, Tuscany build, and he pulls up, and I'm just like, dude, is this your truck? And he's like, because I'm used to getting a Geo Metro and making that 4-hour trip.
Right, jamming his daddy long legs in an economy car.
Yeah. So I get in there, and he goes, I didn't know if you wanted a Killcliff or if you want – no, it wasn't a Killcliff then. You had 2 drinks. You're like, I got you a coffee or I got you that. He's like, hot or cold? And I was just like, this is going to be a good friendship. Like, this is the perfect pickup. Like, and honestly, it seems small, but that's the kind of things that I do because I'm thinking that a hunt to me is it's a team.
Yeah,
you know, it's a team, and you know, small stuff like, you know, if someone shows up and they got a bunch of like really cool coffee packets, but they only packed 4, it's like, okay, so are we all having one just today? Like,
I know what you mean. Like when you go out,
that's just personality traits that gravitate towards me. And I mean, that was a long way to get to why we hit it off, but small pieces.
Would you say Andy's a giver?
Oh,
or
yeah.
a taker?
I mean, I'm like a French door. I can go both ways.
God damn. I knew this was going
If you tee it up for me, I'm going to swing for the fences.
He does, too. Yeah. I don't know. I think that's actually a term that years ago when I worked for a pretty big company, I learned a lot there. And the owner he really was a smart person in business, and he had some very simple philosophies on life. And one of the things that he told me, and this is back when I was maybe 19 or 20, he just said there's 2 types of people. There's givers and takers. And he actually told me this during my yearly review. And he just said, he's like, you are always giving something to help the company. And he was like telling me this as he was giving me a raise and a bonus. And he said, the thing is, he goes, there's the opposite to that. And he said, there's a lot of people that just take and take. And he said, because of, and I was young, so he was trying to mentor. He just said, you do have to be protective of yourself, because he goes, as much as you're going to want to give to people, he said, there's going to be people that are literally going to take until you're bled out. And he said, and they're only seeing it from their perspective. And he just said, what you do as a person, he goes, that is a super awesome quality. And he goes, I try to surround myself with those people, but he said, you have to be protective about how, if someone's taking, like, learn when you need to just draw the line, sever your ties.
If you're if you're that natural giver, I think it's difficult for especially the really nice guys to protect themselves against people that'll just take advantage of that.
It's magnetizing from an outside perspective, because people, they recognize that, I think, inherently in the personality, and because they're the character of people that I would describe as an asshole. They gravitate towards that.
They do,
and I don't know if they even
it's like
realize
blood in the water.
Yeah, you have limited bandwidth, right? I mean, you can't find more time in the day, and you can't add more days to the calendar. It's tough. I describe you to people, and they ask me about you. I say that you're the most generous person that I've ever met, and I don't. And I say, like, I'm talking about knowledge and time.
Yeah,
it's.
And honestly,
which are the things that are valuable?
I remember I have a really, really close friend. He's kind of a mentor throughout my life. He's in his 60s now, but he helped me as I was just growing up. Always there for me, good business advice. And one of the things that he told me was, you know how I know someone cares about me? Is they give me their time. It's not their money.
Yeah,
it's their time, their knowledge.
It's a good saying.
And so I think. People who are willing to give their time to someone else, that's the one thing you can't get more of, right? Yep. It's like it's finite, it's set, and where you put it and use it really talks a lot about, where someone ranks in your life and how important they are. And so I think time, it's interesting you mentioned that.
Well, that's really all, for me, I think just my personality. That's why I'm thankful for social media and the platform that we have now, because actually, someone earlier today, they said, how are you getting on now that your show's not on TV? And I said, man, it's bigger. And I think the same person said, you finally like boomed. Like he said, you were always there, and he's like, you finally boomed. And he said, what do you think did it? And I said, because I left TV, because they were so restrictive on letting me just teach, because they're like, John, you can't have more than 3 minutes and 20 seconds of these types of segments. You can't be standing at a bow press talking without changing clip, bringing in B-roll clips. They're like, you're going to, and I just told them, I said, listen, one, I'm paying for the damn time. But two, I said, Lee and Tiffany kill good bucks. People watch them. If people want to just watch a bunch of whitetails die, they watch monster bucks.
Right.
I said, that's just not, I do it because I love that. I said, but I want to teach people. I want to go someplace like here, and instead of someone coming and telling me a buck story, I want them to come to me and say, I set up my first bow ever this year, and I was able to shoot a deer with it.
Yeah.
And to me, that's 100% rewarding. And actually, we were talking about years ago, there was especially in the professional archery world, it was very hard to get information. And I was always the one telling people, hey, I tried that 4-fletch and I didn't really like it. I went to a 3, went to a shorter. And when I was on the US team traveling, I actually had some of my teammates one time that said, you really need to stop talking to the other countries about some of this stuff, because they said, they're like,
that is funny.
They said, they're like, if they ever figure that out. And I said, well, yeah. But I said, that's going to raise everybody's game.
Yeah.
And honestly,
you probably get that on podcasts too. Like, people are like, why are you telling?
Yeah, they want a rice bowl like this. Don't tell them about my secret things.
Yeah,
you're helping other hunters be more successful. Stop it.
Yeah, well, that's what it was. And then I remember I had this student that I was working with, and I ended up getting, just the way the brackets filtered down, I ended up facing him. I had worked with him for about 2 years in England, and I ended up and he was a young kid. He was like 17 when I started. I think it was 19 when we ended up facing each other in a match. And we shot, and he beat me by 1 point. And I remember as soon as he shot and he hit the 10, he just looked at me and he's like, dude, I'm really sorry. And I go, I'm like,
this is like a proud moment.
Yeah, I said, I couldn't ask for a better way to lose, because I said, in a way, I've only lost to someone that I brought to this level. And I just told him, I said, well, you're never going to beat me again.
And you could have hobbled him and be like, hey, just so you know, I let you win. Would have just hobbled him at the knees. He'd be like, oh, confidence gone.
See, that's what Andy's like.
Yeah, Andy, mental warfare right there.
I wear a hoodie around him, because if you expose any neck, he freaking just goes for it with both hands.
I'm curious with you, Andy, what about archery that as you came on to this, that surprised you the most?
I think it's probably, I would equate it to watching the Olympics, male gymnastics, the ring athletes.
Yeah.
Dudley's like, where is this going?
Me too.
With the package, the spandex?
I just heard
that's
male
a secondary
athletes.
benefit, was their lovely outfits that are from the 1800s. But you can watch a guy get up on the gymnastic rings, and they make it look effortless.
Yeah.
And then what you need to do is go into a gym that has a set of rings and just try to do some of the moves that they're doing. So from an outside perspective, you can watch the shows, right? I'm like, oh, well, you just go get in the stand for 2 minutes, and then a buck walks out, and that's it. You should be done in roughly 45 minutes.
Yep.
Because that's how long the show was. So obviously hunting is 45 minutes. Well, you go and and you get a bow, and you're like, okay, this thing looks like it's made from an alien race. And then I need all this other gear, and I don't know how to put it together. And it's the same thing as going and trying to get on the ring. It's so hard and so complicated and so nuanced, and it's a never-ending journey.
Right.
That was, I guess, the biggest. That's what I love about it, and that's what I think most people will find. There's the expectation of what you think it's going to be, then the reality. For me, I love archery because it's so hard. and I suck at it. That's what I love about it the most because I'm driving to constantly. I just want to be a little bit better than I was before.
Yeah.
And expectation management is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned. Probably coming into it based off maybe I watched too many of those hunting videos. I just
Katniss. I mean,
you just pull. Yeah, you know, in the video or on the poster for the movie, the arrow's on top of her finger. It's not even.
It's now you start recognizing all
pretty
that.
bad.
That was a big thing. Like, you know, it's just the transition of what you think it's going to be, and then you get into it, and I just describe it as a never-ending road. You're not going to get off of it, but hopefully you can get further down it as you go. And I definitely plan on sticking with it because it's so. If it was easy, I guarantee you I wouldn't be interested in it.
Well, and I think so on the hunting side of the spectrum, you know, archery, that's that discipline, but the actual hunting with a bow.
Yep.
How about that? How is that like took you by surprise, if anything?
So in my old job, like I learned about, you know, cover and concealment and how to move in dead space and picking a route and reading a map and using a GPS. So I feel comfortable outdoors.
Yeah.
And we used to deal with, you know, the environmentals. I'm not with a rifle. I can do high angle shots at altitude and varying wind conditions with temperature. Like that's okay. I can do all that. There's a lot of similarities, but then there's a lot of differences. And I would say probably the biggest one is the wind and the impact that it has. Because if you give me a rifle and say I'm shooting somebody, average shot, probably somewhere between 1,000 yards to 1,500 yards. Wind, I'm only looking at it as the effect on the ballistics. Now, probably one of the closest encounters that I had with Dud with an elk in Alberta. Of course, I think he talks to the elk somehow. I don't know how he does it. That goofy hat he wears on his head. But he's sitting there, and he's like, you know what? There's usually a bull down here. And he bugles, and the thing rips off back, and the next thing you know, we're running, right? And I'm just following. I don't know what the hell we're going. And his legs are about 8 feet longer than mine, so I'm trying to keep up with him. And I had the blister the size of a pancake on my heel, too. And we had another dude in a one-piece camo outfit from the 1700s who was chasing us in rubber galoshes. But we got there, and we set him off with the decoy, and Dud's calling, and this animal's coming in, and it was my first experience being near an elk bugling, and I'm in my head, I'm like, well, how can I not see this thing? It's so loud. And the wind shifted just as I thought it was going to come around that big bush. Like, the thing was coming in. Every call, I would estimate it was moving hundreds of yards. It was getting closer and closer and closer. In one little gust of wind, and it just ghosted. And I'm like, Dud, where'd it go? He's just like, dude, the wind has so much, and the power of the nose, and I never took that into account from my old occupation because it just didn't matter.
Right.
And because of the proximity, and you narrow that distance down, it makes those things so much more important and, again, challenging. And you have no control over it. Because I would say we were in the right spot, right? We just caught a swirl, and there was no control.
Yeah.
And,
I would say, too, what's interesting is, you know, scent is something that. So I've interviewed Shane Mahoney.
Yep.
And he's talked about, you know, just our primal DNA is attuned to hunting. Like, we're all here because our ancestors hunted.
Yeah.
And he mentioned that.
Mine didn't. They were vegans.
They said that there's something about hunting and being outdoors that's far different than maybe photography and being outdoors or just hiking and being outdoors. He's like, when you're hunting, all your senses are at a maximum. And the sound of a rustling of the leaves means more. A breeze means more. The scent means more. Like everything, if an imprint in the dirt means more. Like everything means more when you're on the hunt than at any other time. And I think if you haven't spent a lot of time, I imagine, you know, if you're in combat, it's similar in the sense that everything means more, right? You're talking about two like primal struggles. One is, you know, battle and hunting, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting. But you were saying offline, you know, that there's you see correlations between combat and like this military disciplines you've gained, and some with hunting, but some that didn't carry over at all.
Yeah.
And I can see where scent isn't really a strong human
If
defense.
you got that close overseas, you probably were doing something wrong. It just wasn't a thought process. There's a bunch of stuff that I can draw from, but there's just gaping holes.
And I'd say that's the number one too. Like for a hunter, if you're hunting like elk or deer, you can't be winded. Like you can get by with being spotted, you can get by with being hurt, but if you get winded, it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you trigger any sense that they have, their confirmation, if they want 100% confirmation, it's like, I'm going to smell this sucker.
Yep.
I mean, and that's why if you grunt, if you rattle, they're like, okay, I've stimulated one of the senses, but they're coming in at that point, and then they're using the wind to their favor. And that's the only downside, like for that example that you had about the elk. Once that bull lit up like that, I knew he was coming. And you know, a lot of times with bulls, you're trying to get to that little bench to where you can still see over enough, but if you start down that bench, then you're exposed, totally exposed.
He's going to hear where the sound's coming from and not see an elk.
Yeah, and then depending on the terrain, where you need to be is also a sketchy area for wind, for wind and thermals. And we were in that spot, and as soon as I felt it shifting, I'm like, oh crap! Like if I could have had communication with the caller, I'd be like, take off that way. Now you have got to redirect because he was in the perfect position for where the wind was from above us 100 yards. But as soon as we hit that bench, it shifted a little. And so as soon as the bull got within 100, I would say, he's like, I'm going to try to smell it. Yeah. He knew he couldn't see it, so he's definitely going to try to smell it. And, with whitetails, I think that's a big mistake a lot of people make, is almost calling too much to a whitetail. Like I like to call just enough to where they have to come in and really inspect something.
They can't pinpoint exactly.
Yeah, they need to come in and they don't know the exact 10 yards you're sitting in, because then they're more likely to come in without trying to wind you.
Yeah.
But a lot of the deer, especially in a lot of the commercially hunted places, every guy that goes in there that's rattling and grunting at everything, a lot of times once that happens, I've seen really smart bucks just start a button hook at 200 or 300 yards to that sound. And actually a lot of for the elk, when you were hunting, the first time you hunted in Salt Lake, they were all fired up. But then I said, if you can get eyes on them, don't call at all. Don't stimulate that, because they're 100% going to try to smell you first.
Yeah.
If you can, I always think the surprise attack is way better than.
Me too. I'm like,
why tip your hand at all?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Especially, I think the more experience you get, the more you realize that you can sneak up on an animal a lot easier than people think.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the more experience you have, the more confident you are in doing that. But I remember the first time I went out trying to call elk, and I was with my cousin, and we'd gone up and we tracked these tracks through the snow, and we actually tracked a bull elk to this little wallow. And he's sitting there messing around this wallow, and I range him, and he's 65 yards. And this might be a chipper shot for John Dudley, but back then I had a bow and was new to the compound, and I needed like a 30-yard shot. 40 maybe.
I like those shots better.
And I was like, I was looking at this 65, and I'm like, oh, that seems so far away. And so I was looking at the terrain between me and the bull and the wind, and I'm like, I can kill this bull. I can sneak up on this. He's got his head in the water, He's just, and then my cousin's with me, and he's like, but now's the time. Like, we've been practicing all this calling. Let's call. So I'm like, okay, yeah. And then we're in our mind, we're dreaming about this Primos thing where I'm going to call, and this thing's just going to run right over, and he's going to get this close shot. And so I'm like, but I know we can kill this thing if we just sneak up on it. But we're like, but no, the calling thing is the thing. And so we go and drop back and do this thing where, I'm trying to call and pass. Dude, that bull picked his head up, looked right over there, and just walked 150 yards around, to get our wind. That's it. I was helpless. I just had to sit there and watch him smell us and then
Pinned
run
in
off.
place as your opportunity walked off.
Yeah, I'm like, that was stupid.
You need me to come call for you. I sent Dud. I think it's probably the best cow call audio file ever. My golden retriever came running over. So, yeah, like that. There's a gaping hole. Like, I don't know how to do any of that stuff.
Really?
But yeah, I mean, I want to learn. Like again, like I could have all the experience in the world from the military side of the house. There's massive gaping holes in my game because I don't have the experience.
Yeah, especially like animal behavior. Like,
that's one that tripped me up early on.
Like figuring out what they do and how they like to move and just when they like that stuff. You can read a book and you can learn about, but man, there's something about feet on the ground. Kind of switching subjects. I wanted to ask how good a shot is Andy?
He's good.
Average, a little below.
Good?
Yeah, he's a good shot. I mean, I actually was we were shooting at 100 by just before dark, wasn't it? We were kind of running out of daylight.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was like it was getting tough. But I mean, he was just
a natural.
I
just do what he says. He's like, "Hey, do this."
Well, that was okay. That was my
honestly,
next question.
Put your elbow up. Okay.
My follow-up was going to be, what are some things that you do that have helped you improve your shooting, like that stand out for you?
I literally, I joke about it, but I just do what he says. Yeah. I try to be, even when it comes to jumping, I put my gear on the same way. I check it the same way every time before every jump. I touch all of my handles to make sure they're there. I touch them in the same order because I don't want to have to think about that. There's nothing worse than getting ready to jump out of a plane. The last thought that goes through your head is, do I have this on right? Or occasionally when I'm base jumping, I actually posted a picture of this the other day. I'm standing on a railing on a bridge, getting ready to jump off of it. And occasionally what I'll do right before you lean forward so you can't come back anymore. I'm getting ready to jump off a bridge, and a thought will go through my head. Did I pack this parachute right? And because I'm an asshole, sometimes I'll scream at my buddies, right as they're jumping, I'm like, your chest strap. It's totally fine. But,
oh, dude. Wow.
But that's not answering your question. Oh, those are things I like to do. But I try to be very systematic. And one of the things I appreciate about Dud's coaching is it's not geometry, right? He's not trying to teach me calculus. It's like, hey, stance. Grip, anchor, peep, and then pull through the shot. So I just talked myself through that, and I also was introduced to him at a point where I had no archery instruction at all, so it was starting from I busted. Adam Greentree is going to spill a coffee on him later. I try to keep it very simple. I feel that complexity is the best way to ruin an amazing plan.
Yeah.
And so I think of very simple things, and I try to just repeat. Like when he was like, okay, that's how it should feel, or that was good. I'm like, okay, what did that feel like? Repeat that feeling. So I try to keep it as simple as possible. And then for me, what helps me is I try to shoot every day. And it might be, I might have time for 3 arrows. It depends on when my wife wakes up because I'm currently shooting in our basement and she doesn't know about it. I have a very hidden indoor range. It's pretty awesome. So I have to wait until she's either in bed at night or in the morning.
Hidden indoor range.
It's a hidden indoor range. I have to stand in the bathroom, but then I got 20. But Fortunately, she probably won't listen to this, and if she does, I'm going to be in trouble. But I just try to be current. Same thing with a lot of parallels between how I approach jumping. Currency is huge.
Right.
It's tactile. Jumping is all tactile. So if you lose that feeling, it sucks and you're not as good. So I try never to get to that point where I lose that feeling, even when it comes to the shooting. And then, again, I'll sit there and before every shot, I'm like, all right, stance. I'm balanced. Hold the bow up like I was teaching, put the pin on it, pull back the same way. I take my time anchoring. I take my time lowering my eye down to the peep, and then I just focus on pulling through the shot. And that's all I think of.
John, what do you, you see this a lot in the archery community, I think. A guy likes archery. He's got his bow. It's brand new. He shoots it for a month or two. Then it goes on the shelf, and then he pulls it out 2 weeks before season, and he's shooting a bunch.
You actually talked about this very recently.
Yeah. Well, I don't remember, but
how does that
on the Order of Man one you did? It was a similar question, or you talked about your thoughts on. You answer the question.
Yeah. How does a guy
Well, I actually did that one time as I would say like a seasoned hunter. I guess I could say that I'm a seasoned hunter. Mm-hmm. But there was, when I first moved to Iowa, we were packing and moving in a very just frantic rush to get Harry in school for the first day. Uh-huh. And I had my Alberta hunt booked.
Yeah.
So I had called him and said, I just don't think I'm going to, like, my bows are packed. And I said, I haven't got any of my stuff together. We were just in Europe. Now we bought this house in Iowa. We're trying to move. I said, I just don't think I'm going to be able to do it. And then he said, well, really need to get you down here and all this stuff. So Sharon told me, she's like, just pack and go. She's like, just go. We got, Harry's going to start school. Our stuff won't be here for another week anyway. Just pack up and go. So I literally unpacked my case from maybe a spring bear hunt or something, repacked it, and just to make sure I had some stuff in there, threw socks and underwear in there. And I pretty much just said, I've done this forever. I'm just going to go shoot. Mm-hmm. And in the first 4 days, I think I had 3 opportunities. The last opportunity was a really good mule deer that we'd made a really, really tough stalk and some standing wheat and just a total monsoon downpour. And it took 4 or 5 hours to get out there on them because you're on your belly the whole time, just pretty much.
Sweat equity is high.
Yeah, I mean, sweat equity was super high, and we get into, range this thing's 39 yards, and we end up, he stands up, I draw back, and just total whiff. And I remember my outfitter, who's a friend, looked at me, and he goes, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, I have no idea. I said, honestly, I didn't even think I wanted to be here. I'm like, I honestly just feel so unprepared right now. And he's like, well, we can see if we can find something else. And I said, you know what? Just take me back. Let's just go back to camp.
Yep.
We went back to camp, and I took all my gear, packed it back in my bow case, put it in the truck, brought it back inside, unpacked it, and laid everything out like I normally would, grabbed my bow, and I just went to 20 yards and just started shooting until I felt really good. And then I went to 30, and then I went to 40. And he's like, well, are we going to go out today? And I just said, no, I want to shoot today. And it's like, I was so ill prepared that it was a recipe for disaster. And when I did, that was a pretty good wake-up call. For as long as I've done it, that was one time where even the fact that 2 years prior to that, I logged just under 40,000 arrows in practice 2 years before that hunt, it didn't matter. Because the reality was, just 18 months later, I hadn't done shit. And even though I know how to shoot, there's just really small, minor details that aren't in place, which immediately translate into, I feel like, confidence. I feel like if there's ever that little voice, it's like, can I make this shot? Like, I've been with people that are like, you think I can make that shot? And I'm like, no. Like,
absolutely 100% no.
If you're asking me that's a terrible situation.
You think I can make that shot?
Yeah.
You're asking me, no.
and I don't know, I think people that just want to be hunters, I think those are the people that make a lot of mistakes. I think they dilly-dally in hunting. I think if they get a buck, it's something they can talk about, at the next deer classic they go to. Mm-hmm. But, there's just a big movement right now. Like, even sitting here looking around, just the physical appearance of the people in this show are way different than they were 8 years ago. I mean, just people that, you can tell are working out. I mean, there's just, bow hunters used to be a lot more out of shape as a community, but there's just a lot of people that are into all year long archery and training, investing in all the aspects of it. And now more than ever, there's so much success you come to a show like this and there is a ridiculous amount of success with people that are shooting awesome animals, people that are making amazing shots, even just going to an archery, even the fact that there's like a total archery challenge where there's 100-yard shots.
Right. A
100-yard shot, seriously, 100-yard shot. I looked at a picture at home from 2001, and granted it was a shotgun primer at 100 yards, but there was a 100-yard novelty shoot at a professional ASA tournament, and it was a novelty shoot.
Right.
You know what I mean? Now, people would go to Reading, and the highlight would be just watching to see if people would hit the dot at 100 yards on Bigfoot across that canyon.
Right.
And then it got to the point where it's like, people are, they'd give out prizes if people shot both of the arrows hit the dot. So you'd get they'd be giving away prizes. Then it just got to the point where it's like, okay, well, everyone that shoots a 22 is going to go in a hat, and then we're going to draw one. And then it just got to the point where it's like, we can't, there's way too many people shooting 22s to do that because they're better.
Yeah. After I started the podcast and I got more into shooting, because I had the 9-to-5 corporate job, and I would work downtown, and I don't know, I had a lot of other interests as well. And then as I started doing more and more around this space and podcasting about hunting, and really it was an opportunity to learn from other people, sit down with cool people and ask them questions. And it just sort of grew from there. And then I moved to Colorado as Aaron and Snyder did more stuff together. Mm-hmm. And then I watched Aaron shoot, and he's grouping 100 at 100 yards, like these, boom, they're all in the same like little baseball-sized circle. I'm like, I'm having trouble doing that at 40. We have an issue here, and so I'm like, and then the thing I picked up from Aaron is he shoots every day, and sometimes twice a day, and I'm like, but you're already good, and he's like, but I'm not good if I don't shoot every day, and I just didn't put that together for some reason. Maybe it's too much TV or whatever, like Andy was saying, but I just didn't realize that I needed to shoot that frequently and to really hone this skill. And I didn't realize once I got it that it could abandon me. And so I've noticed I've gotten a lot better. I can group at 100 yards really tight. I did that Alpha Bow Hunting Challenge with Phil Mendoza this year, and I actually got first and second place at a couple of those events in the Masters division, some over 40. So, but I mean, it's been a fun journey, and there's no way I could have done that in the past, and Aaron kind of mentored me and taught me, like with you, Andy, how to shoot, and it's completely changed. Like how I shoot a bow now compared to what I used to do was all wrong. And you complicate that with today's stuff, like there's getting your bow accurate so that it actually does what you think it's doing. But then there's, now that it's tuned and your arrows are tuned and everything's going well, now it's actually, can you shoot it, right? And it starts to become, it surprised me how my range became extended dramatically once I improved on my shooting. This year was a little rough on me though, because I'm at the range, and I'm before we left, I put a bunch of broadheads into this elk target at 107 yards, and they're all like pie plate or just right around that range, and I'm like, wow, I never thought I could do that.
Yep.
But when I see a real animal, I get excited.
Yeah.
I get excited in a way that is different than when I'm just shooting at a stationary target and everything's perfect. And that adrenaline that I get, I'm physiologically, my heart's doing things, and I'm sweating, and I cannot hold the bow and shoot the same way with that adrenaline. And in that moment, I realized that my range isn't the same. It's not the same on a real animal.
It's not true acclimation. Acclimation for me, target archery and starting to stand on a line is acclimation. And I made a post the other day because even though I don't compete, I'm still training at a regimen for indoor archery to where if someone showed up at my house that I know that's good, I know that I could represent myself to that level. And because I'm practicing like that, the one thing that's cool for me is live feeds play right into my wheelhouse because they let the viewers
some pressure.
Yeah. I was going to say,
it separates the sugar from the shit really quick because I've been at places where I see people that shoot, that shoot one way in real life, and then I see how they shoot according to what they post or videos they might make or something. And that's gone all the way back to the professional ranks. People that would be their hometown guy that was unbeatable, but then all of a sudden, and this is common, people are the best shooter ever at their local shop. Then they go to a local shoot and they're not as good. Then it gets to a point where they get good enough, then they do a regional, then they might do a state. And every time you make that step, you put yourself into a new uncomfortable position to where you're gonna trigger adrenaline if you're a competitive person at all. So for me, practicing definitely doesn't help me deal with the pressures of hunting. Where I get acclimation is when I put myself or submit myself into a situation where I apply pressure somehow. And so for me, live feeds, like last week, I just turned on a live feed and just said, you guys watch me practice, because they can just watch the target.
Yeah.
They can sit there and watch the target and watch me shoot. And if I make a mistake, everybody's going to see it. Right. And the fact that I know that, I actually practice with an accelerated heart rate. And I'm not saying this on camera, but in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is where I want to be. I've put myself in the position where I want. My heart rate's accelerated right now because I'm doing something that has meaning. So don't waste it. And so it's like, okay, slow everything down. And, and a lot of times if they're watching the live feed, when they see me close my eyes, I'm envisioning, then I'll, a lot of times if my heart rate, if I feel any triggers or variances, I'll really start to focus on my breathing to try to maintain my breathing. But, those things are really important. And if you watch truly good competitors at certain things, they will have very, very specific, you can find triggers to where if they've been trained right in how to bring yourself back down to like a non-accelerated state, there's a lot of triggers that you can do. Me spinning my release on my finger, a lot of times I'll do that with a count, especially if I get to the point where I trigger my conscious mind to kind of spur a fight or flight type thing where all of a sudden I'm like, one more point and you'll win this, or, got to make this shot, or if someone, if all of a sudden I lose focus on my process and I let my conscious mind all of a sudden think about the adrenaline, well, then now you're jacked, and now you're in the position where you said you're in on a deer. So the key is, how do I bring myself back from that the fastest? And the first thing that you have to do is you have to retract the conscious mind back to a process or something that is not relative to thinking about you being nervous. So a lot of times for me, I'll spin my release and I just start counting, because one way you think about it, if we're sitting here having this conversation, then your text goes and you read a text that comes in and says, hey man, you need to be in this booth right now. You look, and then you turn and look at me and Andy and you're like, what were we talking about? Okay, so that's because you triggered your conscious mind to something other than where it should be. So like that, you have to untrigger it. So just like by looking at that phone and breaking your distraction, essentially what I'm trying to do is focus my conscious thoughts on something long enough to break it. So even when we're hunting, if you've seen me, there's times where I'm going in and I want to say I'm always calm, but there's definitely times where all of a sudden, my heart just starts pounding and pounding. And actually with that mule deer that I shot that you guys watched, that mule deer was in canola, and he was only 40 yards away, but the canola was so high I couldn't get a clear shot to the vitals, and he was coming, and the wind was so iffy. Like if he would have just moved 5 yards the wrong way, we would have been busted. Yeah. And we had like 4 days invested in doing stalks, retracting, because the situation wasn't right, and I didn't want to blow the buck out of his comfort zone. So I remember that buck was close, and I kept wanting to try to get the shot to happen, and it wasn't. And I remember I kind of thought, well, I need him to reposition, so I just laid down. And it was the same thing. I just had to just try to break my concentration. So I just looked down. I looked at my sight. I was spinning my release a few times. And, I'm laying on my back, just kind of spinning my release. And I'm looking at my sight. And I thought, okay, count backwards on your scale. So I was like 100, 90, 80, 70. And I just literally, and by the time I got back down to 0, I looked up and started ranging the buck. And my heart rate had got back to where it was manageable to me. But the process or a process helps prevent what you're talking about. Yeah. So that's one step, is you to really have a process to where when you're making your shot, you have a very systematic approach, because it'll prevent you getting sweaty and nervous. But in the same sense, you have to practice acclimation. Find your acclimation to where you get nervous and you can practice bringing yourself back. Okay. You have to, there's two different things. You have to, one, know how to control it, but two, you have to put yourself in it enough to where you're comfortable controlling it. So for me, putting myself on a target line, and having a lot of people watching, and shooting for things of, at the time of value, titles or checks, you get to those things where, I've been standing on a line in front of thousands of people and been so nervous inside that I'm like, I don't know if I could pull my bow back right now. But then you have to just sit there and be like, okay, and honestly, early in my career, I just blew it. Every time I just let people beat me. And I remember the one time where I was actually at an IBO tournament, and I was standing on the last target, and I knew if I shot a 10, I was going to win, and my heart just started pounding and pounding. And I remember telling myself, I'm like, damn it, I am so sick of losing. I've done this so many times, and I'm just sick of it. I remember just saying, I am tired of blowing it. Yeah. And I'm like, just shoot a goddamn 10, Right. And I just pulled back and shot it, and then it was just like, finally, like, get that weight off your chest. And then it seems like once you can do that, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now how do I get better at that mental management? How do I get better at it? So, these are all just small little things that for me, I don't really practice with people watching me because I want them to see me shoot good.
Not to show off.
They are applying a pressure on me that I know if I did something really stupid, it could be a viral YouTube,
Right.
Okay, if I punch myself in the face right now, this is, I'm going to hear
Doug
about it forever.
Doesn't know as much as he thinks he does.
Yeah.
Did you see this?
And honestly, I know that. So having those little thoughts, and that's why I said for me, live practice is a form of acclimation. People probably didn't know what that meant, but to me, that's me preparing myself to better deal with buck fever or target panic or whatever it was going to be. I submit myself in the hot water, and let your body get used to it. I mean,
you have to have that exposure piece.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the parallels that does apply. Mm-hmm. Not that, I should say my experience with the exposure. Everybody's a sniper on a 1,000-yard range when you're laying down and it's 70 degrees and you got, your suntan lotion on and it's just like, I'm just going to take a break and have a snack and no consequence. A lot harder when it's a two-way range. And there's actual, that degradation, it happens. And one of the big things that I found helped me in my old career was you have to have some level of exposure. You have to know that degradation is going to happen. And then once you're in the pool a little bit, you can learn to swim a little bit better. But everybody gets it. I think you have the tools developed over decades to deal with it that's one thing too. I think people who, like myself, I get that same feeling when an animal walks out and I just freak out. That's what I do with it. And miss. That's my technique. Freak out and miss. You should try it. I can always hit the earth, sometimes the animal. But you got to have that exposure. And I found that in my military career, you'd see guys without that experience. And so the way we would train to that is you're always trying to push towards it.
Yes.
No low heart rate training. Like, to me, you need to seek that failure and live right there, and that'll move your needle for you. That has applied for me as well, too. So, I try to go for me, I'll just try to elevate my heart rate somehow or anything that gets, because that's,
right. It's not due to adrenaline, but it is due to maybe the push-ups you just did.
Yeah, whatever you can simulate it to a degree. And you're going to have a higher heart rate than standing on a paper range for real.
Completely.
Get comfortable at that higher heart rate.
I did that Alpha Bow Hunting Challenge, and it's Phil Mendoza put it together, and it's head-to-head. And there's about 50 to 100 people standing there, and they announce it, and you're going, and it's bracket, and you go through a bracket, and you run down, and it's not very strenuous at all physically, but it is a speed thing, and you carry a little sandbag, and you drop it, and you run back and take a shot, and you carry a sandbag, and you drop it and take a shot, and there's 5 arrows, and that thing's over in 2 to 3 minutes. But you're going head to head, and this guy breaks like 2 clay pigeons on the foam target, and this guy breaks 1, and he's ahead, and you're like, oh, and you can hear what's going on. Well, some of that pressure that John has, like I run a hunting podcast, and I shoot a bow. I'm never claimed to be like super talented or gifted in this, but there's a certain amount of pressure that comes from the idea of having to perform and then looking stupid in front of a lot of people. And I don't want that. I don't want that. And so that definitely put me under pressure and really helped me become a better shooter. So
Bill Winky's like, do not leave me hanging at the autograph booth.
Yeah, you got to go. So, you guys, I'm sorry I kept you over, but I just want to say thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having us, man.
For those that are listening, Andy, you have a podcast called Cleared Hot.
Indeed. My favorite radio call ever. It's going to blow up right after that.
So you can check that out, iTunes.
Wherever you can find podcasts, but I don't know where people find them, but it's in iTunes for sure.
And then, John, you've got yours, Knock On. And I think most of my listeners, they all know about you. So, but anyway, thanks for coming on. I have so much more I want to talk about.
Long overdue.
I know.
We need to hook up
That'd be great.
when I come out to Salt Lake. I'm coming out to take a culinary class.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
His cooking will blow your mind.
I know. I see the Traeger stuff all the time.
See, I'm geeking out on that.
I watch a lot.
I'm engulfed in learning food because I just like eating good wild game.
I do too. So, all right, guys.
All right,
thanks
brother.
for coming on.
Thanks.
Stay gritty.
See you, everybody.
Despite our ever-changing, ever-indignant world with its growing ignorance of and indifference to the ways of the wild, I remain a predator, pitying those who revel in artificiality and synthetic success while regarding me and my kind as relics of a time and place no longer valued or understood. I stalk a real world of dark wood and tall grass stirred by a restless wind blowing across sunlit water and beneath star-strewn sky. And on those occasions when I choose to kill, to claim some small part of nature's bounty for my own, I do so by choice, quickly, with the learned efficiency of a skilled hunter. Further, in my heart and mind, I know the truth and make no apologies for my actions or my place in time. Others around me may opt to eat only plants, nuts, and fruits. Still others may employ faceless strangers to procure their meats, their leather, their feathers, and all those niceties and necessities of life. Such is their right, of course. and I wish them well. All I ask in return is no one begrudge me, and all of us who may answer the primordial stirrings within our hunter souls, my right to do some of these things myself. What you just heard is a quote from M.R. James. We truly live in a world that is largely ignorant and indifferent to the ways of the wild. And although some regard us as relics of a time and place no longer valued or understood, we have the opportunity to change the way these people view the hunter and the hunt. We can share our experiences and nature's bounty with those who employ these faceless strangers. And by so doing, we make a difference, not just for ourselves, but for the wild animals in the wild places we care so deeply about. Never stop sharing your passion for hunting and the outdoors. Our wild animals and our wild places depend on it.
This is Ty Stubblefield, and you're listening to The Gritty Bowman.
Gritty Bowman.